Given the amount of time you spent in Japan and how well you know the US Japan relationship as well, if you go back a few decades, the US and Japan also go through in the 1980s a very intense competition, right? Primarily economic, of course, in that case, but intense regardless, right? And that has a lot of ramifications at that time as well, right? For industry, for industrial policy, for companies on both sides. How much of a difference do you see between that US China competition today vis a vis that US Japan competition a few decades ago?
Um, there, uh, thank you for asking that question because it's one of the big themes of the course I teach at Georgetown University. In addition to, it's not a full time thing. The Asia Group's my full time work, but I enjoy talking about this topic. The Japan had a period of very rapid growth, and its enormous capability to do engineering and particularly manufacturing engineering with great efficiency, and combine that with large amounts uh, of financing at reasonable rates, some of it systemically pushed in that direction, led to Japan suddenly rising on the global stage as like the best manufacturing center in the world, in at least in some key sectors. So when I was a baby diplomat, I was involved in conversations about how do we force Japan to create export quotas for things that they don't even make now, semiconductors, satellites, um, in addition to the things which they still make extraordinarily competitively, like automobiles. Um, the That was a moment in time that made Japan seem bigger than it actually was. It is a nation of 120 million people, um, whose economy then, you know, when other types of competition became more important, Japan did okay, but not great,
Yeah.
and no longer looked world beating. So does that analogy apply to China? Well, there are differences between Japan and China, right? China's bigger by population, has a larger internal market, is less export dependent, um, is a continental power versus a maritime power. It's a theoretical geopolitical adversary of the United States, theoretical and actual at this point. Um, Whereas Japan was a defeated adversary that then became a treaty ally. So there's a lot of differences in both global positioning, inherent capabilities, size, and momentum. But on the other hand, there's similarities: aging population, excessive reliance on manufacturing, that then create overcapacity and threaten other markets, which creates a reaction from those other markets. Um, Slow-footed ability of government to steer in new directions, excessive reliance on state capital, which then stifles innovation, lack of global friends, or a fairly narrow range of global friends. And so, some of these weaknesses that Japan ran into are also true in the case of China. My own sense is that there's this whole debate about peak China. Is China peaked or is it not peaked? I mean, how do you define that? I don't know how you define it, but it's an interesting conceptual thing to think about. And my own sense is that it's kind of plateauing, as a global competitor, or a globally dominant nation. One could make the same case about the United States. I'm not sure. We have some advantages. We have immigration. We have freer flowing capital. We've got a superior educational system. There's some reasons to be hopeful about the United States that China doesn't have. And it's quite possible that all of that, combined with a shrinking population, which is forecast to drop significantly by the end of the century,
Yeah.
like significantly, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That could lead to people looking back when my grandchildren are fully operational adults saying, well, that China thing, that was a first half of the 21st century thing, and now we're looking to India, and we're looking to Africa, and we're looking to Europe, or we're looking back to the United States. And I don't know how that's going to turn out, but it's an interesting comparison, and I think it's important to keep in mind. The reason why it's important is, what is the goal of U.S. and Chinese policy in this environment where perhaps in terms of national power, the lines are intersecting or close enough that the U.S. and China are rightfully focusing on one another as competitors. Well, then how do you manage that competition
Correct.
and have it not both damage prosperity but also damage peace and stability? And that I think, again, getting back to my earlier point, should be the primary focus of policy, not just rising on the U.S. side, not just rising to the challenge of China, but then also how do you have this result in the outcomes that you want?
Yeah.
And inevitably, that conversation gets back, and I'm sure you have many conversations like this in your podcast, gets back to, how does the United States do its own self-strengthening rather than trying to kneecap China?